comment more than a question. I really appreciate and encouraged by a sort of multidimensional approach here, particularly in Peter's survey of sort of backloading the religion. I've been to a number of conferences on secularism in the past where the ideology was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It was much more ideology than social science. And just to caution, I think you're already seem to be quite cognizant of this, but also is that there often are more than one dimension to some of these questions. I remember commenting on an article, actually I think it was for a book that Lori was editing once some years back, where the author of this particular article was going on about the Saskatchewan Lord's Day Act in the courts, where the Lord's Day Act was overturned, and talking about this as a great triumph for the freedom of religion, which I suppose it was, but it was also a great triumph of management over labor. And I think we have to be aware of these other dimensions, particularly as sociologists of religion, where we tend to ignore class. And I think those are things that we have to be aware of. And I'm encouraged that you really seem to be taking these multi-dimensions into account.
First, I'd like to say that all the projects were incredible. They were very, very interesting. And I have a question for Juan about the law program, the law project. Like, if I'm not wrong, you mentioned that when analyzing the same-sex marriage situation, it was quite similar in the different countries of analysis. And I would like to know if, when concerning other topics, was there a considerable difference? Because I don't know much about the legislation in Canada yet or in Argentina, but I would expect to be a difference considering the social religiosity of the countries. If that is different, how does that reflect in legislation in general?
Thank you, Luma. What I wanted to emphasize that in this first approach to the topic, we were surprised by the similarity, probably because the countries are so different in themselves, and also the difference, as you mentioned, in the percentage of non-religious people in each of the country. However, when you translate that to the legal arena, there is something about the juridification, the technicalities of that legal arena that probably make some similarities also occur. For example, the discourse of human rights, as you know, is a sort of global transnational discourse. So there is something about reframing moral, ethical, religious position in human rights languages that is very central. Also, probably the global role of the Catholic Church using human rights in connection to natural law. So there is another kind of similarity over there. And also most of the actors, this was just a first review of the general actors taking place. Both kind of confrontational actors in this field, like the religious actors, and also the feminist and LGBTQI movement tend to be also transnational actors. So probably we were very surprised because of those similarities. That doesn't mean we are not looking for a lot of difference. That of course in this exploratory kind of first approach did also occur. The presence of religious organizations are different. Also, the power of atheists organization in each country is different at the moment of debate of same-sex marriage. So that's a general question.
Can I just to jump in, it's also worth saying that they are all former Christian countries. So they've actually got a lot in common. I think there's a lot of similarity because they've got that shared history and background and a very similar religious framework that they're coming out of. So no, non-religion is framed in relation primarily to Christianity in all of them. It would be extremely different if we were in a Muslim country or in India or in China, for example.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for all these talks. I really appreciate this. Lori reminded me of this conference just yesterday in an email exchange, so I'm able to thankfully register last minute and join you all. It's really good to see the progress on all of these different topics. What's exciting, especially for me, just in comparison to the Understanding Unbelief program, where we ran these cross-cultural surveys and interviews and whatnot. And I think this program is a good counterpoint to that, in that we were pretty worldview heavy. And so the emphasis on getting into different contexts here. So the fact that it's getting into trekking, education, law, refugee policy, community gardens, these types of things as context that might get people talking about these things, but also just, as you say, how they're living their lives and putting these ideas into practice, or not, if they see a connection with these different things. So I can see how this is coming together, and I think it's really exciting what's going to come out of this. My more critical comment is I'm a broken record on this issue, but just to kind of ask repeatedly to see where you are in your thought process on the definition of non-religion, where it's been sidelined. And you're saying, and I appreciate it, of the taking a social constructivist approach, which in my mind means, an emic approach of how are our social actors in these different contexts we're looking at, how are they conceptualizing these domains and thinking of their own identities and practices in relation to religion and non-religion. I guess where my question is, are they? Like when you're in a community garden, or when you're looking at refugee policy, or in hospitals, do people use the term non-religion? And if they don't, then it's you as a scholar who have an Edic understanding of what you think non-religion is, and you are taking their discourses and trying to match it to your Edic understanding. And if you do that without interrogating your Edic understanding and saying exactly what your Edic understanding is, that seems to me to be an issue. If they're using the term and you can develop the constructivist emic thing, great. But if it's on the edict side, that just seems to me quite difficult, especially when you're looking to do comparisons. So I'm wondering if that conversation is coming up across the projects as to how are we getting closer to a solution or a project position on it based on what you're finding in this different context. That's my comment or question. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, John. I'll start, and then probably Peter might want to chime in on this one too. I think we are still so early in the data collection stage that I can't say, yes, we're finding that. I think that the moment will come when we are pressed up against that wall, and we will have to be able to answer your question more fully. At the moment, we have been able, and I know you're asking this question, and you've asked it before, and I really appreciate your asking it, because we've worked really hard to press people to bracket this and to not go down that rabbit hole, because we really have felt that it's a bit of a rabbit hole this early on. But we will have to do this. I mean, we will have to engage with it. I think it will be much easier when we have a little bit more to work with. Peter, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, I did bring this up very, very briefly in my little presentation. And it's something that is, as Laurie says, definitely not something that ethically or amicably you want to close off too soon, right? Because one of the dangers here is, and I referred to that dark matter analogy, is that we're trying to research something that we can't actually see using the tools that we have that are at our disposal. But you have to approach it in some fashion that will at least get you there. The portion that I've developed for myself as I think about this, without trying to impose it on the projects that I'm involved in any kind of definitive way, but kind of a reference point. A number of years ago, somebody pointed out to me when they asked me, what do you count as religion? It says, well, I let my research subjects determine what's religion using that strategy. And this fellow pointed out to me, says, yeah, but you got one in the background that you're using ethically as well. And I said, yeah, actually, you're right. And so the background one that I've been using, I tried to get into this kind of like, and I know others have used it, like Sarah, as well as this, the, what do you call it? The, I call it the 4 C's from going from religious studies, code, community, cult, and creed, and finding parallels to those things, which are kind of elements that you can look for. I mean, how do people do collectivity? How do people, you know, what is this values? What is good and what is bad? Those kind of ethical questions. What do you know? How do you view the world, and what is real in that world? And then the practical one about how do you put that into action. Another way that I try to look at it is, and I mentioned this briefly in my slide, is you know, how do people run their lives? This is, I mean, I might refer to it again to the lived non-religion kind of thing, without trying to put the whole thing in a kind of a box. Leave it open enough that we really have to admit that we don't quite know yet what we're going to find. But on the other hand, close it off enough so that we don't go into this broad field where everything counts. One of the reasons why I don't like to use the word worldview, because I find a great difficulty delineating what that means. It's one of those placeholders, and we're trying to get beyond that, but not in a way where we say, okay, we're going to decide what non-religion is at the beginning, and then we're going to apply that conceptualization in a concerted and controlled fashion in our research. I don't think that's the way to go. So I actually like the ambiguity that our projects are at the moment showing. John.
I just wanted to answer John's question, because in the migration group we originally started off with public policies on migration, to which degree is religion, non-religion present or absent in these public policies. And some people said, you won't find anything, let's skip that and do something else. I decided to do an independent study of Norwegian public governmental white papers to the parliament on migration since the 1970s. So I have a bunch of these white papers looking at this issue. And I was surprised at what I found. It is stated in several white papers, or several, at least 3 of them are stating, for example, one stated, we estimate that about 2/3 of immigrants coming to Norway are not religious. They are not members of faith communities and not active in any. And then they also added in another white paper that said something that many immigrants or refugees flee from religion. For example, one stated that even if people are members of faith communities, they are the large majority are passive members. They don't participate. There's a great variety of how involved they are in religion. In spite of these statements, as soon as it's talked about worldviews, culture, faith among migrants, they talk about how religious they are. There are statements like many migrants come from countries where religion plays a much larger role than it does in Norway, etc., etc. So in spite of these kind of somewhat factual statements or estimates of how the situation looked, the portrayal of immigrants is that they are very religious people. So they're actually very inconsistent in the information they give, that they don't take into account, and then the portrayal and framing of migrants. And I was actually very surprised to find that. I thought I would have to look and kind of analyze it much more in depth. I was surprised to find how blatant it was at some point. Thank you.
I do want to address, someone asked questions about country choices, and it's a good question. It's one we've agonized over it. We agonized when we were designing the project. We agonized when we were, Inger, Peter, and I studying for the eventual questions that the interview board would put before us, and we anticipated the questions about countries. There are a number of reasons, actually. Some of them are practical and some of them are strategic. Strategically, it's on the comparability side of things that we felt that we had countries that would at least be able to be compared. The other thing is that in the Religion and Diversity Project, which is the last one that some of us were involved in, what we found was most effective was to gradually form relationships and collaborations with people who were already doing research in other countries. So for example, India was pulled into that project through a series of collaborations with Indian researchers. And so we decided we couldn't do everything. We had to be strategic. We have a generous budget, but the budget limits how many countries we could choose. At the time of the research design, we had also hoped that one of our co-investigators would be doing a project on China, and it turned out that project didn't unfold. And so China would have been included in the sense in that that researcher would have been doing research on China. And we were also aware that John, in fact, did research in China. So we knew we had some connections on that front. It didn't necessarily work out, and we still remain open. So for example, there are a couple of people who are participating in the conference today who have proposed a large project in Turkey. And we're hoping that they are successful in that. And so that we might be able to have conversations about comparability, about possible projects that would overlap and so on. So that's how we've chosen to proceed. Some very practical reasons and some strategic reasons as well. So without further ado, we're a minute past time, which is not bad. I'd like to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to my team who have presented everything they're doing so well. Thank you to the other members of the team who are here and haven't had a voice, but hopefully you saw yourselves represented. And then thank you to everyone else for your interest. I would like to just say, if at any point you have suggestions, if you go away and you think, well, I really think you ought to consider this, we welcome that. We are still, in some instances, relatively in design phase. The projects we've presented are not all the projects we'll do. This is our first round of projects, and we're hoping if they go well, we'll have a second round of projects. But right now we have all we can handle with what we're doing right now. So I do sincerely appreciate your attention and your willingness to engage with us on the project and listen to where we are with the research design and as we enter into data collection phase more fully.